The iron burned against her skin like an unfulfilled promise. She heard the bells tolling for her soul as the wind carried the scent of incense and fear. The priest's eyes didn't see her, they only saw the price. When the temple doors burst open with a crash that shook the ground, when that presence entered like a breathing shadow, she knew. This was not the sacrifice destiny had awaited. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The moon hung over the kingdom of Ash like a wound that never healed. She watched it from the narrow window of her room, a tower that felt more like a cage than a royal chamber. The wind seeped through the cracks in the ancient stones, carrying with it the murmur of the parched fields and the distant lament of the peasants who blamed her existence for the curse that withered the land. She was born under the eclipse. That was enough. Her mother had died in childbirth, and with her she had taken any trace of tenderness that might have existed in that castle of stone and silence. The king, her father, never spoke her name again. When he needed to refer to her, he used only the girl or her, as if to name her was to give her life. And life was something he preferred to deny. The iron collar around her neck grew heavier with each passing year. An heirloom from a forgotten queen, they said. It had never been removed since it was placed on her at her baptism. A baptism without celebration, without music, just murmurs of fear and hastily sprinkled holy water. The priest swore the collar kept her contained, that her blood carried something that must not be awakened. She never knew what it was. She only felt the cold metal against her skin, a constant reminder that she didn't even belong to herself. The castle dogs would retreat when she approached. The servants would lower their eyes, make the sign against evil, and whisper prayers as she passed through the empty halls. No one touched her. No one spoke to her beyond what was necessary. She had grown up shrouded in silence, like a statue that breathes but does not live. And then came the night the bells began to toll. She recognized the sound before she even understood its meaning. It was the tolling of the offering, the ancient ritual that appeased the dead and calmed the forgotten gods. Someone would be offered. Someone would pay for the fear of the living. When the maids entered her room without knocking, carrying a white dress that smelled of withered lilies and candle wax, she knew. She had always known. She didn't fight when they undressed her. She didn't cry when they pinned her hair with silver pins that pricked her scalp. She didn't tremble when they covered her shoulders with a mantle that felt like a shroud. The silence that had lived in her since childhood now took on form, materiality. It was as if her entire body had turned to stone, cold, motionless, eternal. The mirror on the wall reflected a stranger. She didn't recognize herself in that figure cloaked in white, her face pale as the moon, her eyes empty. She looked like a bride. She looked like a corpse. "It's time," the oldest maid said without looking directly at her. They descended the stairs in silence. The entire castle seemed to hold its breath. In the corridors, torches flickered as if the air itself was afraid. She counted the steps in her mind, each one a second less of existence. Her bare feet touched the cold stone and the chill crept up her legs, seeping into her bones. The courtyard was empty, but she felt eyes in the shadows, hidden servants, nobles who dared not show their faces, perhaps even the king somewhere high above, watching from afar the daughter who had never been his. The carriage that awaited her was black as pitch, adorned with symbols she did not understand. 2 white horses as still as statues held their breath. When she approached, one of them neighed softly, a sound like a lament. She entered alone. No one helped her. No one said goodbye. The doors closed, and the darkness swallowed her whole. The journey to the temple was long, but she didn't measure the time. She only listened to the rhythmic sound of hooves against the dry earth, the creak of the wheels, the wind that whistled through the cracks. With every turn, she felt the weight of the collar increase, as if the chain knew where they were taking her and was trying to warn her of something she already knew. When the carriage stopped, the silence that followed was different, dense, expectant, heavy with foreboding. The doors opened, the temple rose before her like a cathedral of bone. Pale candles burned by the hundreds, casting shadows that danced on the stone walls like restless souls. The floor was covered with withered petals, roses that had once been red, now just brown and grey. The air smelled of incense, myrrh, and something older, something that recalled turned earth and dried blood. The priests awaited her in 2 rows. They wore black, their faces hidden by hoods, their hands clasped in prayer. No one raised their eyes as she passed. They only murmured chants in a dead language, words that slithered like snakes across the floor. In the center of the temple, the altar, it was made of white marble stained red, not with fresh blood, but with the marks of all the past sacrifices, absorbed by the stone like scars that never fade. Around it, circles of salt and ash formed symbols she recognized from her nightmares. Those dreams where she ran through endless forests. Pursued by something she never saw but always felt, she walked alone to the center. Each step echoed in the silence, a hollow sound that seemed to come from within herself. When she reached the altar, she stopped. There were no orders, no explanations, just the expectant silence and the crushing weight of a destiny she had never chosen. She knelt. The marble was cold against her knees. She closed her eyes. She took a deep breath, searching for any trace of fear, of anger, of a will to live, but found only emptiness. She had always been empty. Perhaps that was why they had chosen her. Perhaps the gods preferred offerings that were already dead inside. The chants grew louder. The priests' voices intertwined in a dissonant harmony, a sound that scratched at the soul. She felt the ritual approaching its climax, felt the air growing denser, heavier, as if something invisible were descending upon the temple. And then, the wind changed. It was subtle at first, just a different breeze coming from an unexpected direction. But it grew quickly, becoming a gust, then a howl. The candles flickered violently. Some went out. The petals on the floor rose in eddies, spinning like tiny cyclones of death and lost fragrance. The chants faltered. She opened her eyes. The stained glass windows, which had once reflected the pale moonlight, now glowed red, a deep, visceral red, as if the sky itself were bleeding. The colours spilled across the walls, dyeing everything scarlet. And then, the sound. Hoofbeats. Not the ordinary trot of horses. This was something deeper, heavier, more definitive. Each beat echoed like a war drum, making the ground tremble, making the walls groan. The entire temple seemed to awaken from an ancient slumber, as if it recognized that sound from ages past. The priests stopped chanting. Some fell to their knees. Others retreated into the shadows. The fear was palpable now, not the ritualistic, controlled fear that fed the sacrifice. This was true, primal terror, the kind of fear that makes men forget their prayers. A crash. The temple doors, enormous, made of ancient wood reinforced with iron, exploded inward. They weren't opened. They were shattered. The fragments flew through the air like dry leaves, and with them came shards of glass from the stained glass windows, which broke in a cascade, raining color and light onto the stone floor. The wind swept in like a living creature, extinguishing all the candles at once, plunging the temple into absolute darkness. For a moment, only silence. She remained kneeling, motionless, her heart beating for the first time in years. Not with fear, but with something she couldn't name. It was as if her body knew something her mind had not yet grasped. Then the darkness began to move. It wasn't just an absence of light, it was a presence, a shadow that breathed, that had weight and substance. She felt it before she saw it, a pressure in the air that surrounded her, enveloped her, recognized her. A faint light returned, not from the candles, but from the moon itself, now piercing through the broken windows. And in that filtered red and spectral light, she saw. He was in the doorway. He didn't walk in, he was simply there, as if he had always been, as if the space around him had rearranged itself to accommodate him. Tall, cloaked in a black that was not fabric but something deeper, materialized darkness, wearable night. The face was human only in form, beautiful in an impossible, unsettling way, like something sculpted by hands that knew the forbidden secrets of perfection. But it was the eyes that held you. They had no whites. They were entirely dark, deep as bottomless wells, but within them something glowed. A red light, ancient, primordial. When those eyes met hers, the altar lost all meaning. The sacrifice became a joke, the ritual, A farce. The older priests, those who could still breathe, murmured a name that had not been spoken for centuries. A name that existed only in forbidden texts, in legends whispered at midnight, in nightmares that crossed generations. The Alpha, the first, the last, the lord of the primordial blood. She should have been afraid. She knew this. But what she felt was different. It was recognition. As if this impossible presence were less strange than all the rest of her life. As if, finally, something in the world made sense. He didn't look at the king who watched from the shadows, pale as death. He didn't look at the priests who trembled in their robes. He walked directly to the center of the temple, each step making the floor groan, each movement altering time itself around him. When he stopped before her, the silence was absolute. She raised her eyes slowly, traveling up the body that seemed made of solidified night until she met that face. The proximity should have been unbearable, that supernatural presence, that power that made the air vibrate. But she did not look away, and for the first time in her life, someone saw her. He didn't see the symbol, he didn't see the curse, he didn't see the offering. He saw her. "It was not for faith they brought you here," he said, and his voice was like subterranean echoes, like the sound the earth makes when it cracks open. "It was for fear." She didn't answer. Not because she was afraid, but because there were no words. Her gaze was a mute abyss, and in that silence, something in him wavered. Not his power that remained absolute, but his certainty. As if, for the first time in countless ages, he had found something he did not understand. His hand rose, long pale fingers colder than the marble. He touched the chain on her neck. The iron burned. She saw smoke rise from his fingers, smelled the scent of scorched flesh mixed with the perfume of extinguished candles. But he did not pull back. He held the chain firmly, and in that touch, there was something more than strength. There was recognition, anger, perhaps even sorrow. The sound of metal falling on the marble echoed through the temple like the crack of a world splitting in two. The chain lay at her feet, still smoldering, the ancient iron finally freed from her neck. She breathed, for the first time without weight, for the first time without the memory of what she had never been. The air entered her lungs differently, colder, more real, as if, until that moment, she had only been half-breathing, just enough to survive, but never to live. The candles which had gone out with his arrival began to relight themselves, but not with the yellow, lifeless light from before. Now they burned blue, a cold flame that did not warm, only illuminated. The shadows on the walls changed shape, grew denser, more alive. The Alpha remained before her, motionless as a sculpture, but she felt the tension in his body, a violent restraint, like a storm trapped in a glass dome. His eyes still studied her, and in his gaze were layers she could not decipher. Hunger, perhaps, but not the hunger men called desire. It was something deeper, more ancient, the hunger to recognize something lost. Behind him, the king finally found the courage to move. He rose from the shadow where he had been watching, his royal mantle dragging across the floor covered in petals and broken glass. The crown on his head seemed too heavy, as if with each step it tried to tear itself from his skull. "You have no right," he began, his trembling voice disguised as authority. "She was consecrated to the old gods. The pact!" "The pact," the Alpha interrupted, his voice making the walls tremble, "was made with me, not with your dead gods. Not with your empty prayers." The king grew even paler, if that was possible. His hand sought support on a column, his fingers white against the stone. For the first time in her life, she saw him clearly, not as a father, not as a sovereign, but as a man. Small, frightened, guilty of something he himself did not understand. "You have forgotten," the Alpha continued, his eyes still fixed on her. "But the blood does not forget. The earth does not forget, and I never forget." The priests began to murmur desperate prayers, disjointed chants that tumbled over one another. Some fell prostrate, foreheads to the ground, begging forgiveness from deities that never answered. Others tried to run, but the destroyed doors offered no escape, only darkness beyond, a darkness that moved, that breathed, that waited. She remained on her knees in the center of it all. watching. She should have been terrified. She should have been begging. She should have been doing anything but just watching. But for the first time, she felt awake, as if the past 20 years had been just a dream, and now, finally, she was opening her eyes. The Alpha extended his hand to her. It was a simple, almost human gesture, but nothing about him was simple. That hand represented choice, and choice was something she had never had. From birth, her destiny had been drawn, her life a straight line to that altar. But now, in that gesture, there was a fork. There was possibility. She looked at the outstretched hand. The fingers were long, elegant, but at the tips was something dark, not dirt, but essence, as if the nails had been dipped in liquid night. The skin was pale as a winter moon, but beneath it no veins pulsed, only silence. "She cannot go with you," the king said, his voice now utterly stripped of authority, just a desperate plea. The kingdom needs the sacrifice. The fields are dying. The people? "The kingdom is already dead," the Alpha replied, and there was absolute coldness in his words. "You killed it when you forgot the price, when you tried to pay with counterfeit coins, when you offered what had already been promised to another." The king staggered. Behind him, the nobles who had been hiding in the shadows began to emerge, their faces pale, their eyes wide. They all wore the same terror, the terror of one who finally understands that the debt has come to be collected. "My daughter is all I have," the king whispered, and for the first time in 20 years he used the word, "daughter. Please." The Alpha turned to him, and the movement was so fast it seemed he hadn't moved at all, just changed position, as if editing reality. He faced the king with an intensity that made the man fall to his knees. "You never had her," he said, each word a sentence. "She was never yours. From the moment she was born under the eclipse, from the moment her mother died to bring her into this world, she belonged to something greater than your fears. You only imprisoned her. You put iron on her neck and called it protection. You locked her in towers and called it care. But I know what you were really doing." The silence that followed was so thick it was suffocating. "You were trying to hide her from me, and from herself." She didn't fully understand the words, but she felt their weight. It was as if memories she'd never had began to pulse at her temples. Flashes of something ancient, a forest under a red moon, hands clasped over an altar of living stone, promises whispered in a language that was not human. The Alpha turned back to her, and in his gaze was a deep, painful recognition. He extended his hand again, this time with more urgency, not a command but an invitation. Not a demand but an offering. She looked at the kneeling king. The man who had never been a father, never been a protector, never been anything but a coward dressed in a crown. She had hoped to see something, regret perhaps, or belated love, but she found only selfish despair. He didn't fear for her. He feared for the kingdom. He feared for himself. She rose slowly. Her legs trembled for a moment, not from fear, but from imbalance. 20 years kneeling, bowing, contained. Her body had to relearn how to stand upright. When she was on her feet, she realized she was taller than she had thought. The world looked different from this height. Less oppressive, less absolute. She placed her hand in his. The touch was ice and fire simultaneously. She felt something course through her arm, not pain, but recognition. As if every cell in her body knew that touch, as if it had been waiting for it forever. His fingers closed over hers gently, like someone holding something precious and fragile. "No," the king moaned. "No, please." But it was too late. The temple began to tremble. Not a violent tremor, but a steady, deep one, as if the very foundation of reality was being rewritten. The columns cracked, not from top to bottom, but from the inside out, as if something long contained was finally escaping. The remaining stained glass windows exploded in a cascade of colors. Red, blue, gold, all mixed in the air, forming impossible vortexes of light. The blue candles grew into tall flames that licked the ceiling but did not burn. They only transformed. The Alpha pulled her gently closer, and when she leaned against his chest, she felt the void where a heartbeat should have been. But that emptiness was not death, it was something else. It was eternity. It was the silence that precedes creation. Her blood belongs to no altar, he declared, his voice echoing not just in the temple, but beyond, in every stone of the castle, in every tree of the kingdom, in every drop of water in the dry rivers. It does not belong to you. It never did. The sentence fell like a prophecy. The floor beneath the altar began to give way. It wasn't crumbling, it was sinking, as if the temple itself rejected its presence. The white marble, stained red by generations of sacrifices, began to crack. And from the fissures emanated not earth, but liquid darkness, the same darkness that enveloped him. That was part of him. The priests finally fled. Stumbling over each other, trampling their own robes, the nobles ran after them, forgetting all dignity. Only the king remained, kneeling among the shards of his broken kingdom, looking at the daughter he had never known. She looked at him one last time. She wanted to feel something, anger perhaps, or sadness, but she found only emptiness. He was a stranger. He always had been. The connection that should exist between a father and daughter had never formed, because he had never allowed it. Fear had been stronger than love, and now fear was all he had left. The Alpha started to walk, and she followed. Not because he dragged her, but because her feet moved of their own accord, or perhaps by a will deeper than reason. They walked over the temple's debris, over the dead petals, over the coloured glass that now reflected only darkness. When they reached the destroyed portal, she stopped and looked back one last time. The temple was slowly collapsing, like a sandcastle touched by the tide. The walls curved inward, the columns sank, the ceiling dissolved into luminous dust. But there was no violence in the destruction, only a return, as if everything was reverting to a previous state, to a forgotten truth. The king, still kneeling, raised his eyes to her. In that moment, she saw something she had never seen before. He was old, not just in age, but in essence, as if years of guilt had finally taken their toll, compressing decades into seconds. He opened his mouth, perhaps to ask for forgiveness, perhaps to curse, perhaps just to say her name. That name he had never uttered, but no sound came out, only air, void of meaning. She turned and walked through the portal. Outside, the night was different. Not just dark, transformed. The sky had no stars, only that wounded moon hanging like an open eye over a world that was finally revealing its true face. The wind blew steadily, but not cold. It carried a strange temperature, neither warm nor cool, just present, like breath. He waited for her a few steps ahead, his back to her, observing something she couldn't see. His silhouette against the sky was a perfect cutout, so defined it seemed drawn by darkness itself. The black mantle, if it was a mantle, moved without wind, rippling with a life of its own. When she approached, he extended his hand again, and this time she did not hesitate. The touch was already familiar, as if their palms had known each other in another life. He led her down the hill, following a path that hadn't existed before, or perhaps had always existed, just invisible to eyes that didn't know how to see. The kingdom of ash stretched out below them. From above, it looked even more dead than she had imagined. The houses were hunched shadows, the streets dry veins cutting through desiccated flesh. No light in the windows, no smoke from the chimneys. It was as if everyone had fled, or worse, as if they had never truly existed. "They fear the night," he said, the first words he had spoken to her since they left the temple. "But it's not the darkness they should fear." She didn't answer. Not because she didn't want to, but because she was still learning to use her own voice. 20 years of imposed silence leave their mark on the throat, make the vocal cords forget their function. Every word she tried to form died before it was born. He seemed to understand. He didn't press. He just kept walking, and she followed, her bare feet now accustomed to the cold earth. She realized she felt no pain, not from the rough ground nor from the hidden stones. It was as if her body had awakened to a resilience it had always possessed but never used. They crossed the forest that surrounded the castle. The trees were black skeletons against the sky, their gnarled branches forming Gothic arches. No animal moved among them. No bird sang, but there was a sound, a constant whisper, as if the forest itself was breathing, telling secrets in a language of bark and dead leaves. "Are you afraid?" he asked suddenly without looking back. She thought about the answer. She should be afraid. She was walking through the darkness beside a creature that was not human, leaving behind everything she knew, however terrible it was. But when she searched for fear within herself, she found only curiosity and something deeper, something that felt like relief. She shook her head, even knowing he wasn't looking. "You should be," he said, and there was something strange in his voice, almost sadness. "Everyone should be afraid of me." They stopped in a clearing where the moonlight could penetrate. In the center were the ruins of something ancient, not a temple, but perhaps a house or a monument. Stones covered in black moss, symbols worn by time. He finally turned to face her, and under the direct light, she saw details she had missed before. His eyes were not completely black. There was depth to them, layers and layers of darkness, each a different shade of night. And in the center, that red light pulsed like a distant heart. His face, which seemed sculpted from marble, held an expression, not motionless as she had imagined, but restrained, as if every emotion was a conscious effort not to explode. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. She nodded slowly. She knew. Not from the murmurs of the priests or the whispered legends. She knew because something inside her recognized him, as if she carried a memory that was not her own, knowledge inherited in her blood. "Then you know I am not kind," he continued, taking a step toward her. "I am not a hero. I did not come to save you out of compassion." Another step. The distance between them shrank, but she did not retreat. She kept her eyes fixed on his, even as instinct screamed to look away, to lower her head, to bow as she had always done. "I came because you are mine," he said, and the words fell between them like stones dropped into a still lake. "You always have been, since before you were born. Since your father made the pact and tried to break it. Since your mother—" He stopped. He closed his eyes for a moment, and in that gesture was the weight of ages. When he opened them again, something had changed. The hardness had given way to a fragility he couldn't completely hide. "She knew," he said, softer now. "Your mother knew what you were, what you would become. That's why she died, not in childbirth, but by offering herself in place of what was to come, trying to alter a destiny that was already written." She felt something break inside her chest. Not physical pain, but something deeper, the shattering of 20 years of silence, of 20 years without answers. Her mother, the woman she had never known, the queen who was just a name on a forgotten tomb. She had offered her own life. For her. But it didn't work, he continued, closing the distance until he was just a step away. Because some destinies cannot be altered, only postponed. And the price of postponement. He reached out, touching her neck where the collar had been. The skin was marked, a red line that circled it like an ancient scar. He traced the mark with his fingers, and the touch was gentle, almost reverent. The price was you living 20 years as a prisoner. 20 years of silence, of rejection, of fear. Your father thought the collar would protect you. He thought that by keeping you contained, the pact would be forgotten. But pacts of blood do not forget. And He left the sentence unfinished. He took a few steps back, turning away as if he couldn't bear the proximity. His shoulders were tense, his hands clenched into fists. "I waited," he finally completed, his voice lower. "Because there is no hurry when you have eternity. But every day that you suffered, every night you spent in that tower, every look of fear you received, I felt it like thorns under my skin, like a thirst that never kills but never relieves." She took a step toward him. This time it was she who chose proximity. She placed a hand on his back, hesitant at first, then firm. The black fabric was cold, but beneath it she felt solidity. Not the warmth of a living body, but a real presence. He existed. He was not an illusion or a nightmare. He turned abruptly, so fast it should have startled her. He grasped her shoulders with a grip that was not violent, but desperate. The red eyes glowed intensely now, almost feverish. "You don't understand," he said. And for the first time there was raw emotion in his voice. "I am not human. I do not feel as humans do. What I feel for you is not love as they know it. It is possession. It is need. It is a hunger so ancient it precedes the creation of the world itself." She held his gaze. There was no fear in hers, only a growing understanding. An understanding that this impossible being, this creature of legend and terror, was confessing a weakness. He was admitting something that made him vulnerable. "Say something," he pleaded, almost a supplication. "Anything, scream, cry, curse me. But don't be silent. Not anymore." She opened her mouth. Her throat was dry, the words rusted from disuse. She tried to form a sound, but what came out was just a hoarse, inarticulate breath. Frustration burned in her eyes, the first real emotion she allowed herself to feel. He saw, he understood, and something in him broke. He pulled her to him, embracing her with a force that should have broken bones but didn't hurt. His face buried itself in her hair and she felt something wet against her temple. Not tears, because vampires don't cry, but something similar, something that was his version of a lament. "I would have kept you silent too," he whispered against her hair. "Because when you speak, when your voice finally sounds, the whole world will change. And I'm afraid of what will come after." She closed her eyes, leaning against him, allowing herself to feel for the first time in 20 years. Not pain, not fear, but connection, real, deep, impossible and inevitable at the same time. They stayed like that for an indeterminate time. The forest around them continued its whisper. The moon watched without judgment, and the wind carried secrets that neither of them was ready to face. When they finally separated, he wiped her face with his fingers, fingers that trembled slightly, as if holding something too precious to be real. "There is a place," he said, regaining some of his composure, "far from here, where you can learn to use your voice again, where no one will judge you for your past silence." She nodded. "But when we get there," he continued, and there was a warning in his voice, "you will discover things about yourself, things your father tried to hide, things that I myself don't know if you're ready to know." He looked up at her, seeking confirmation, seeking certainty that she understood what she was choosing. She took his hand and squeezed it, not with force but with decision. It was answer enough. He smiled, and it was such an unexpected, so humanly vulnerable an expression that for a moment he seemed just a man tired of waiting, tired of being alone, tired of the eternity that weighed like a lead crown. "Then let's go," he said, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Before I change my mind and decide to keep you here in this forest just for me, before the world reclaims what it never had the right to have." They walked together into the darkness, two shadows merging into one, leaving behind the kingdom of Ash, which, at that very moment, was beginning to crumble, not into physical ruins but into oblivion, as if it had never existed, as if it were just a bad dream that finally fades with the dawn. But dawn would not come, not for that kingdom. They say that since that night the sky has remained perpetually grey, neither day nor night, just eternal twilight, and the bells, which once called for the sacrifice, now ring on their own when the wind passes through the empty towers, not in lament, but in warning, a reminder that some pacts cannot be broken, only fulfilled. They walked for hours or maybe days. Time had lost its meaning as soon as they left the temple. There was no sun to mark the hours, no fatigue to measure the distance. She just walked, his hand enveloping hers, guiding her through landscapes that changed in impossible ways. First, it was a forest, then an open field under a steel sky. Then mountains appeared where there had been nothing before, and rivers flowed in directions that defied gravity. It was as if they were passing not through space, but through layers, veils between worlds that he parted with his mere presence. She felt no hunger, no thirst, only that expanded consciousness, that constant awakening that made every sensation feel new. The wind on her face was more than air. It was sound, perfume, a memory of places she had never visited. The earth beneath her feet told stories in every grain, each stone a word in an ancient book. "We're close," he said finally, breaking hours of silence. Before them, on the horizon that shouldn't exist, rose an impossible structure. It was not a castle, not a fortress. It was something between a ruin and a palace, between memory and reality. Black towers reached for a sky that had no end. Arched bridges connected empty spaces, and glassless windows looked inward upon themselves. As they drew nearer, she realized the stones were not built, they grew, like trees of rock intertwining in organic patterns that followed the logic of a dream. Luminous moss covered some surfaces, pulsing softly in a rhythm that seemed like a heartbeat. "My home," he said, and there was a note of something that sounded like shame in his voice, or what's left of it. "I haven't had visitors in a long time. The gateway had no doors. just an opening that led into a darkness denser than night. He hesitated before entering, looking at her with an unreadable expression. "Last chance to go back," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I can still take you back. Make up some story. Tell the priests the gods rejected you." She looked back. The path they had traveled was just mist, dissolving into nothing. There was no going back, not physically, not emotionally. And even if there were, she wouldn't want to. For the first time in her life, she was choosing. Even without a voice, even without fully understanding, she was saying yes. She squeezed his hand in response. He closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing that decision, storing it somewhere deep inside. When he opened them again, there was a renewed determination. "Then cross the threshold," he said. "But know that in doing so, you will no longer be entirely human. This place, it changes those who inhabit it, slowly, irrevocably." She took the first step, then the second. There was no fear, only curiosity. As she crossed the portal, she felt something pass through her, not pain, but recognition. As if the place was scanning her, evaluating her, accepting her. On the other side, the darkness gave way to a strange light. It came not from torches or candles, but from the walls themselves, a pulsating soft blue-green luminescence, revealing a vast and impossible interior. The ceiling was so high it was lost in shadow, and enormous columns supported nothing or everything. The floor was a black mirror reflecting a sky that did not exist. "There are no servants here," he explained, walking ahead. "Only the place itself. It responds to what you need if you know how to ask correctly." As a demonstration, he extended his hand and a chair materialized from nothing, not appearing, but growing from the darkness itself, molding into black wood carved with patterns that hurt the eyes if looked at directly. "Your room," he said, pointing to a spiral staircase that ascended infinitely, "is at the top of the East Tower, or wherever you want it to be. The castle rearranges itself according to your will, just don't go to the North Tower. Not yet." She raised an eyebrow in question. "It's where I keep memories," he said, and there was ancient pain in his words. "Memories that should not be disturbed, not even by me." They began to climb. The stairs weren't tiring, or perhaps she no longer got tired. They passed empty floors, closed doors, corridors that led nowhere. Everything was silent, everything waiting. As if the castle had slept for centuries and was now slowly, lazily awakening. The room he showed her was vast but welcoming. It had a huge bed with black velvet canopies, glassless windows showing changing landscapes, now mountains, now sea, now a stellar void. There was a full-length mirror on the wall, and when she approached it, she saw herself for the first time without the collar. Her neck was marked, yes, but not ruined. The red line that circled it was almost beautiful, like a delicate tattoo, like a necklace of rubies engraved on her very skin. She touched the mark, feeling a different texture, warmer than the rest of her body, pulsing slightly. He watched from the doorway, leaning against the frame, his arms crossed. There was a tension in his body he tried to hide, but couldn't completely. "Rest," he said finally. "You've been through a lot. Your body may not feel tired, but your soul needs to process." She turned to him, shaking her head. She didn't want to be alone. Not now. Not after 20 years of forced solitude. The idea of more silence, even in a beautiful place, was unbearable. He understood. He always understood. "Then come," he said, extending his hand once more. "I'll show you what I truly keep here. Not painful memories, but beauty. The things I've collected over the ages, trying to remember that the world is not always darkness." They went down together, but not by the stairs. He led her down a side corridor that opened into an immense gallery. The walls were covered with paintings, not hung but growing from the stone itself, as if they had been dreamed there. There were portraits of people long dead, landscapes of places that no longer existed, battles that no book recorded. "I painted some," he said, stopping before a particularly beautiful image. A garden under a triple moon, with flowers that shone like stars. "Others I collected. I tried to preserve what time destroys. It's futile, I know, but I have to do something with eternity." She observed each painting attentively. There was sadness in all of them, even the most beautiful. As if the artist, or the collector, knew that beauty is always temporary, always fleeting. They stopped before a portrait of a woman, young, with dark hair and light eyes that seemed to see beyond the canvas. She wore a white dress, and around her neck, an iron collar. She recognized her before he even spoke. "Your mother," he confirmed, his voice hoarse. "I painted it from memory. She came to me once before you were born. She tried to negotiate, offered her own life in place of yours. But He stopped, unable to continue. His hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms. When he finally spoke again, the words came out broken. "I refused. Because I wanted you. Because the pact was specific. Because I was selfish and cruel and thought I had every right to be." He turned to her, and on that perfect face was human devastation. Remorse so deep it bent his shoulders, that extinguished the light in his eyes. She died that same night. Not in childbirth, as they told you, but in my castle, in my arms, asking only that I be kind to you, that I not hurt you, as I had hurt so many others. Tears, not tears, but something viscous and dark, began to stream from his eyes. He wiped them away angrily, as if ashamed of the weakness. "And what did I do? I let you grow up in solitude. I waited 20 years while your father imprisoned you, mistreated you, turned you into an offering. I could have taken you from there as a child. I could have stopped the suffering, but I didn't, because I am a monster, because the pain of others never mattered to me. Until you." He fell to his knees before her, and the movement was so human, so broken, that she felt something tear inside her chest. She placed her hands on his face, forcing him to look at her. In his eyes, she saw what he was trying to hide: guilt, regret, love. Yes, love. Not human, perhaps, not gentle, but love nonetheless. Desperate and destructive, but real. She knelt down too. They were at the same height, eye to eye, their breaths mingling. Hers warm and alive, his cold and ancient. She touched his face gently, tracing the lines that seemed sculpted, feeling the impossible temperature of his skin. He closed his eyes at her touch, leaning into her hand like a wounded animal seeking comfort it doesn't deserve but desperately needs. "Tell me you hate me," he whispered. "It would be easier. It would be what I deserve." She shook her head. She moved closer until her forehead touched his. There were no words, but none were needed. The gesture said everything: forgiveness, acceptance, an understanding that no one chooses what they become. They only deal with the consequences. They stayed like that, kneeling on the gallery floor under the painted gaze of her mother, while the castle around them sighed and rearranged itself, as if recognizing that something fundamental had changed. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a beginning. And sometimes, beginnings are all we have. The days, if you could call them that, began to merge into a rhythm of their own. There was no sun to mark mornings, no sleep to separate vigils, only that constant mutable light that the castle emanated according to the mood of its inhabitants. She learned to move through the corridors without fear. She discovered that the place responded to thoughts, not words. If she wished to be in the library, a hallway would open, leading her right there. If she needed silence, the sounds themselves would muffle, respecting her need. The library was her favorite place. Shelves that rose until they were lost in shadow, books in languages she did not know but could understand when she opened the pages. She didn't read with her eyes. The words entered her mind directly, carrying not just meaning, but the emotion, the memory of the writer, the weight of time. He would appear sometimes, silent as a shadow, sitting in a chair materialized beside her. He wouldn't speak. He would just be there, his presence a comfort she hadn't known she needed. Sometimes he brought objects, a flower that glowed in the dark, a crystal that sang when touched, a feather from a bird that had never existed. They were gifts without explanation, offerings without demand for reciprocation. She accepted them, keeping them in the room she now recognized as hers. Each object was a fragment of him, not of his power, but of his vulnerability. Each gift said, "See, I am more than a monster. I am this too." One night, or what they called night, he found her on the terrace. She was watching the impossible sky, that expanse of colors that changed like a liquid mood. He approached slowly, as if afraid of startling her, and stood beside her without touching. "Do you miss it?" he finally asked. "The kingdom, the sun, human things." She thought about the answer. It wasn't simple. Yes and no were intertwined. She missed what she never had. Not the kingdom that had rejected her, but the possibility of belonging. The human warmth she had never received. The sound of laughter that was never directed at her. But now she had chosen silence, not imposed. She had a solitude that didn't hurt. She had a presence that didn't judge. He interpreted her silence correctly. He always did. "I can give you many things," he said, his voice low, almost a confession. "Eternity, power, knowledge that humans take lifetimes to accumulate. I can make it so you never feel cold, hunger, or physical pain again. But I cannot give you back your humanity. Once you cross the threshold, once you are touched by the darkness, you will never be just human again." She turned to face him. Under the strange light, he seemed less a monster and more tired, infinitely tired, as if he carried the weight of all the ages he had lived, all the choices he had made, all the people he had lost or destroyed. "You ask if I regret it," he continued, reading something in her eyes. "Bringing you here, taking you away from the human world. And the answer is, I don't know. I am too old for regrets, but too young not to feel guilt." He took her hand, intertwining their fingers with excessive care, as if she were porcelain that might break. "I will teach you to speak again," he said, "if you want. Not because I need your words, I already understand your silence, but because you deserve to choose. You deserve to have a voice even if you choose not to use it." It was a promise. It was a gift. It was an apology for all the years she had spent mute. She squeezed his hand in response, an acceptance that needed no sound. They began the next day, or what they agreed to call the next day. He took her to a circular room in the heart of the castle, where sound echoed strangely, amplifying and distorting. "The voice is not just sound," he explained, standing in front of her. "It is intention. It is materialized will. Your vocal cords have forgotten the movement, but your soul has never forgotten how to scream." He placed his hands on her shoulders, holding her with a firm but gentle grip. "We'll start simple. Not a word. Just a sound. Let out what's trapped inside. Don't think. Don't try to control it. Just release." She looked into his eyes, searching for courage. She found not judgment, only patient expectation. He would wait as long as it took. He had eternity. She closed her eyes. She reached inside herself for the place where she kept everything that had never been said. 20 years of fear, anger, loneliness, confusion. 20 years of swallowed screams, restrained tears, words dead in her throat. The first sound that came out was hoarse, broken, more air than voice. But it was a sound. She felt the vibration in her own chords, strange and familiar at the same time. "Again," he encouraged. "Stronger. Don't be afraid to break. You can't break. Not anymore." She tried again. This time, the sound was clearer, though still distorted, like rusted metal being bent, groaning under the pressure of years. He smiled, a rare expression that completely transformed his face. For a moment, she glimpsed what he had been before the darkness consumed him. Someone who knew how to smile. Someone who knew joy. "Again," he said. "And again. Until your throat remembers it was made to sing." They practiced for hours. She emitted formless sounds, sometimes high, sometimes low, all disjointed and strange. But each attempt was less painful, less forced. Her vocal cords rediscovered their elasticity. Her throat relearned the passage of air. When she finally stopped, exhausted in a way that wasn't physical, he hugged her. It was an impulse. She realized it by the way he hesitated mid-motion, as if he didn't know if he was allowed. But she let herself be enveloped, leaning against the cold chest where there was no heartbeat, only an empty silence that was somehow comforting. "You're making progress," he murmured against her hair. "Soon words will come, and when they do..." He didn't finish, but she felt the tension in his body, the unspoken fear. When she spoke, when she could finally express her will, desires, thoughts, what would she say? Would she stay? Or would she ask to leave? The weeks passed, or what they called weeks. Time in the castle was malleable, responding more to emotions than to natural cycles. She continued to practice, and gradually sounds became syllables. Syllables took shape. They weren't words yet, but approximations. He taught her other things too. He showed her how the castle worked, how to shape the reality around her with simple will. He taught her the language of objects, how every stone had a story, every shadow a memory. He revealed secrets that humans spent lifetimes trying to discover, delivering them like casual gifts. But he never took her to the North Tower. That remained forbidden, the door sealed with symbols that glowed red when she approached. He grew tense every time she glanced in that direction, so she learned to avoid it. One night, she woke, if she even slept, with a strange feeling. Something was calling her. Not a sound, but a deep pull in her chest, as if an invisible thread connected her to something distant. She got up, following the call through the corridors that rearranged themselves around her. She found herself before the North Tower. The door was ajar. She knew she should go back. It was the only thing he had asked, not to go in there. But the call was unbearable, like thirst after days in the desert. Something inside that tower recognized her, wanted her, needed her. She pushed the door open. Inside, a different darkness. Not an absence of light, but a negative light, as if it absorbed all clarity around it. A spiral staircase ascended, and she followed it, her bare feet silent on the cold stone steps. The top of the tower was a circular room, empty except for a single object in the center, a huge mirror as tall as 3 men, its frame of black silver carved with figures that moved when not looked at directly. But it wasn't a reflection it showed. It was a memory. She saw her mother, not painted, but alive, young, pregnant. She was in that same tower before him, pleading. The words didn't reach her ears, but she understood their meaning. Her mother offering everything, life, soul, eternity, all in exchange for the freedom of the daughter who had not yet been born. And he, younger in appearance, but with the same darkness in his eyes, refusing. Not with cruelty, but with something worse, indifference. As if a human life were a worthless currency. The scene changed. Her mother dying, not in childbirth, but right there, blood on the stone floor. She was whispering final words that were not a curse, but a plea, asking him to be kind, to have pity on the child she would leave behind. And he, kneeling beside the body, realizing too late what he had done. Too late to save, too late to change. Just enough time to carry the guilt. You shouldn't be here. The voice came from behind her. She turned. He was in the doorway, his face a wreck of emotions he was trying to contain. Anger, fear, shame. This is the truth I tried to hide, he said, entering slowly. The mirror of memories. It shows what really happened, without lies or filters. I keep it here because I need to remember. I need to carry the weight of what I did. He approached the mirror, looking not at his reflection, but at the memory that still replayed his mother's death in an infinite loop. I could have saved her, he said, his voice broken. I could have accepted her sacrifice. But I was proud. I thought I had a right to you because I made a pact with your grandfather, because your blood carried something of mine from generations back. I thought love was possession, that wanting was enough. He turned to her, and in his eyes was complete devastation. I learned too late that it isn't, that love, if monsters can even love, is not about taking. It's about protecting. It's about giving freedom, even when it hurts. And now you know the truth. You know I am responsible for your mother's death. That your suffering, your loneliness, everything came from my selfish choice. He fell to his knees again, as he had in the gallery, but this time he wasn't seeking comfort. He was seeking judgment. So hate me, he said. Curse me, leave me. Do what your mother would have done if she had lived. But know that I cannot undo what I have done. I can only carry it, and it will be a burden I will bear until the end of eternity itself. She looked at him, then at the mirror, then at the tower that held so many regrets. And she felt something move within her, not anger, not hatred, but a deep and painful understanding that no one is just one thing. Neither monster nor hero, just complexity, contradiction, a failed attempt to make sense of what we are. She knelt before him, as he had knelt before her. She placed her hands on his face, forcing him to look. And for the first time in 20 years, after weeks of practice, after all the accumulated silence, she opened her mouth and spoke. One word, just one. But it carried the weight of everything she had never said, everything she had felt, everything she had chosen. I'll stay. The word hung in the air between them like a crystal suspended in the void. Fragile, luminous, impossible. He remained motionless, as if he had forgotten how to breathe, as if that single sound had more power to destroy him than any forged weapon. "You spoke," he whispered, his voice hoarse with something that seemed like astonishment, fear and relief intertwined. "And you said—" He couldn't finish. His hands, always so steady, trembled as they touched her face, tracing her features as if to confirm she was real, that this was not an illusion created by a desire too ancient. "I'll stay," she repeated, her voice still uncertain, each syllable an effort but clear. Clearer than he had expected, more determined than she herself had imagined she could be. "Not because I must, because I choose." The words came out haltingly, separated by long pauses as her throat remembered how to form each sound. But there was conviction in them, a truth that transcended the difficulty of articulation. He closed his eyes and something flowed from them. Not tears, but the pure essence of lament. He pulled her to him with a force that should have hurt, but she just leaned in, allowing him to fall apart in her arms, allowing the immortal monster to weep like a lost child finally found. "I don't deserve this," he said against her hair, his words muffled, broken. "I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't deserve you. I don't deserve—" "No one deserves," she replied, the words gaining fluency with each attempt. "No one deserves anything. We just live. We just choose. And I choose this." They held each other at the top of the Forbidden Tower, while the mirror of memories continued its infinite cycle of remorse and death. But now the weight was shared, the burden divided, and something in the tower itself seemed to sigh, as if it could finally rest. When they separated, he wiped her face with infinite gentleness, his fingers trembling against her skin. "Then we'll start again," he said, his voice regaining some of its firmness. "Not as master and offering, not as captor and prisoner, but as we are," she completed, smiling for the first time she could remember. "Just as we are." It was simple. It was impossible. It was everything. The following months, or what they measured as months, were of discovery. She learned to use her voice not just to speak, but to sing. The entire castle vibrated when she intoned wordless melodies, and he would stand motionless wherever he was, just listening, as if that sound were the only real thing in his existence of shadows. He, in turn, opened up, slowly, painfully. But he opened up. He told stories of the eras he had witnessed, of empires he had raised and destroyed, of loves he had had and lost. Each story was a confession, each memory a piece of himself given without guarantees of return. She listened to it all. She did not judge. She just absorbed, understanding that he was the sum of millennia of choices, some good, many terrible, all irreversible. And yet, she chose to see him not just as the sum of his past, but as the possibility of a future. One night, lying under a sky he had shaped for her, constellations that never existed, but should have, she asked something she had always wanted to know. "What? Am I to you?" He was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost reverent. "You are the proof that I can still feel. After so long of being only darkness, only emptiness, you are the first thing that hurts in a good way. That reminds me that pain is not just punishment, but evidence of being alive, or something close to it." He turned to her, his red eyes glowing in the twilight. "You are the regret that teaches me I can change. You are the forgiveness I didn't ask for but received. You are the choice that scares me because you could change your mind. You could realize you deserve more than the monster who stole you from the world. And I would have to let you go. And I don't know if I could." She touched his face, tracing the lines she now knew by heart. "I am not yours," she said, each word heavy with meaning. "I am not anyone's. I am my own, but I choose to be here. I choose you. And a choice is more than possession." He smiled, that rare smile that transformed devastation into something close to peace. "You teach me more than I have taught you," he said. "About freedom, about love, about a humanity I thought I had lost so long ago I couldn't even remember what it felt like." He pulled her close, and she fit against him like a piece that had always belonged there. Not by fate, not by a pact, but by a choice renewed every moment, every day. With every breath she still needed to take, and he did not. "If you ever change your mind," he whispered against her hair. "If you ever want to see the sun again, to experience human life, to grow old and die as you should have, I will let you go, I promise. Even if it destroys me, because I have learned that love is not about keeping. It is knowing when to let go." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She just pressed closer against him, allowing the silence to speak what words could not carry. The seasons passed, or what they agreed to call seasons. The outside world continued to exist, somewhere beyond the veils that separated the castle from ordinary reality. But inside, time was fluid, malleable, responding more to emotions than to astronomical cycles. She changed. Not drastically, not suddenly, but little by little. Her skin grew paler, her eyes deeper. She no longer needed food, only occasionally feeling the desire to taste something for the pure pleasure of the memory of humanity. The blood in her veins began to run slower, colder, closer to his. He noticed every change with a mixture of fascination and guilt. Guilt because he knew the castle was transforming her, that his proximity was altering her irreversibly. Fascination because each change made her more a part of that impossible world, more suited for the eternity he could offer. "Do you regret it?" he asked once, watching her observe her own hands in the strange light, noticing how the veins were less visible, how the skin seemed almost translucent. "Regret? What?" she answered, her voice now fluid without hesitation. "Trading. A short and miserable life. For a long existence beside you?" The pauses still existed, but now they were a choice, not a limitation. A way to give weight to her words, to allow each one to breathe. Trading, forced, silence. For a chosen voice, she continued. Trading, loneliness, for companionship. Even if that companionship is a monster who is learning to be less of a monster. She smiled, moving closer to him. "No, I don't. Regret it." He kissed her then. The first true kiss, not taken, but given and received mutually. It was cold, as one would expect, but not dead, just different. Like kissing a winter night when it decides to be gentle. When they parted, she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Hope. Real, fragile, afraid of itself. But hope. "We will build something new," he said, taking her hands. "Not a kingdom. Not an empire, just a home. This castle, which for so long was a prison of memories, will now be a refuge. For you, for me, for anyone else who needs a darkness that doesn't judge, a silence that doesn't oppress." It was a promise. It was a plan. It was a possible future. Years passed, real ones this time, marked not by sun or moon but by internal changes, by a growth that was not physical but spiritual. She completely mastered her voice, singing songs that made the very stones of the castle weep. She learned to shape the reality around her, to create beauty from nothing, to transform darkness into art. He learned to laugh, not a reluctant smile, but a true, deep laugh. He learned to play, to be light, to allow joy without immediate guilt. He learned that redemption is not a single event, but a continuous process. Each day a choice to be better than the day before. Together they transformed the castle. The North Tower, once forbidden, became a gallery of memories. Not just painful ones, but all of them. The forgotten joys, the moments of beauty he had witnessed. The mirror still showed his mother's death, but now it also showed other things. Her first smile, her first song, their first kiss. They created an impossible garden within the walls. Flowers that glowed, trees that sang, fountains that wept melodies. It was a place of peace, of beauty that did not ask for forgiveness, but simply existed. And one night or day, it no longer mattered. As they sat in that garden, hands intertwined, she asked something that would change everything. If you could, go back, change everything, prevent the pact. Let my mother live, would you? He was silent for a long time. It was an impossible question, a trap of regret and speculation. Because if he changed the past, she would never have been born in that way, would never have come to him. They would never have this that they now shared. "I don't know," he answered honestly. Part of me, the part that still remembers being human, says yes. I would give it all back, this castle, my power, my eternity, just so your mother could live, so you could grow up loved, normal, happy. He squeezed her hand. But part of me, the selfish part that will never completely change, whispers no. Because without that tragedy, without that mistake, we wouldn't have this. And this, you, me, us, is the only thing in millennia that makes existence worth something. He looked into her eyes, searching for judgment. Is that the wrong answer? She smiled. Not sadly, but with deep understanding. It is. A human answer. And monsters, who learn to be human, are more interesting than humans, who have never doubted. She rested her head on his shoulder. We can't change the past. We can only decide what to do with the future that's left. And what do you want to do? He asked. Everything, she answered. See every corner of this castle. Learn every secret that you keep. Sing until the stones weep. Love until you forget that one day you were only darkness. He laughed, a sound that still surprised him when it came from his throat. That could take an eternity, he said. Well, she replied, smiling, luckily, we have time. And so they remained, while the garden around them blossomed in impossible colours, and the entire castle sighed contentedly, and somewhere far away, the world that had forgotten them continued to turn, unaware that two hearts, one beating, one not, had found peace in the most unlikely of stories. They say that if you travel far enough beyond the known realms, if you cross the veils between worlds, if you know the right words to open forgotten paths, you will find a castle of black stone where a different kind of silence dwells, not oppressive, but welcoming. They say that there lives an ancient creature, the first and last of his kind, who has learned to be more than terror, more than legend, more than absolute darkness. And beside him, a woman who was born under an eclipse, who was offered as a sacrifice, who chose to stay not out of fear or duty, but for something deeper, a love that transcends humanity without losing its essential humanity. They say that at night, you can hear a song that makes the stars stop turning, and that whoever hears it, even from a distance, feels something in their chest, a recognition of a truth that everyone knows but few admit, that we are all, in the end, a mixture of light and shadow, and that it is in this mixture that true beauty is born. They say many things, but only those who live inside the castle know the truth, that there are no happy endings, only continuations. That redemption is not a destination reached, but a journey without end. That love does not heal all wounds, but makes it bearable to carry the scars. And that sometimes, very rarely, monsters learn to be gentle, sacrifices learn to be choices, and darkness learns that it does not have to be lonely. Sometimes, just sometimes, stories that begin in tragedy find not a happy ending, but something better, a purpose. If this story found a mirror in your soul, leave your comment and share. Sometimes what hurts us is what makes us most human.